Bonjour et bienvenue à l'ILARA, l'Institut des langues rares de l'École pratique des hautes études PSL. Hello and welcome to ILARA, our institute whose aim is to showcase the rare and precious ancient and contemporary languages of the world. Je suis ravie de vous retrouver en cette deuxième rentrée de l'ILARA. Nous sommes en pleine période d'inscription et je vous invite à découvrir sur le site principal de l'ILARA l'offre de formation de cette année. Vous y trouverez plusieurs initiations à des langues anciennes comme l'amorite et le vieux norrois sous forme de stages intensifs ou de cours tout au long de l'année. Mais vous y découvrirez aussi des formations concernant des langues contemporaines comme le siwi, parlé dans une oasis égyptienne, ou les langues bantoues, entre autres. Toutes ces formations sont accessibles au niveau débutant et sont ouvertes à toutes les personnes intéressées. Les cours ont lieu soit à distance à travers Zoom, soit en mode hybride, ce qui nous permet, tout en retrouvant le plaisir de la transmission incarnée, de les proposer également à toutes celles et ceux qui ne sont pas parisiens. Afin de vous permettre d'avoir une idée plus précise des formations offertes, nos enseignants mettent en ligne sur notre chaîne en ce moment des vidéos d'introduction. Découvrez-les vite dans la playlist « Les ouvertures de l'ILARA ». Mais c'est une autre playlist qui est à l'honneur aujourd'hui, celle des invitations. En direct des États-Unis, nous recevons Pius Akumbu, spécialiste de phonologie des langues bantoues et locuteur du Babanki, pour une table ronde portant sur l'importance du rôle des locuteurs pour l'étude des langues rares contemporaines. Il nous présentera ses invités en direct d'Afrique, d'Australie et d'Asie. Mais avant de leur donner la parole, je vais dire quelques mots du professeur Akumbu. Actuellement professeur associé à l'Université de Missouri-Columbia, Pius Akumbu est un spécialiste reconnu de phonologie, en particulier des systèmes tonaux. Mais en parallèle avec cette recherche fondamentale, il est engagé depuis plusieurs années dans une réflexion de fond concernant le rôle des langues locales dans l'enseignement et dans la vie des communautés africaines, en particulier celle du Cameroun, son pays d'origine. Il a publié plusieurs articles importants sur ce sujet, qui est au cœur des approches actuelles pour une linguistique éthique, durable et juste. Car en effet, sans les communautés qui les parlent, un peu partout dans le monde, que saurions-nous des langues rares? Et quel est le sens d'une science dont le but est de mieux comprendre l'esprit humain, si ces découvertes ne s'adressent qu'à un étroit cercle de spécialistes? Sans plus attendre, je vous invite à rencontrer ces linguistes engagés, qui sont aussi des locuteurs de langues rares, ou qui travaillent étroitement avec eux. N'hésitez pas à poser vos questions tout au long de ces échanges, en français ou en anglais, à travers le chat en direct. Welcome to you all for this exciting roundtable about the centrality of speakers and communities' roles in the study of underdescribed languages. Please ask your questions in the live chat, share your comments, and participate because this roundtable is also yours. Pius, nous sommes très heureux de t'accueillir cette semaine à l'ILARA pour cette table ronde sur le rôle des locuteurs dans l'élaboration des grammaires de langues peu décrites. Many thanks and a warm welcome as well to all your panelists. Over to you, Pius.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. Many thanks also to Mark and the entire team at ILARA for giving us this opportunity to add our voices to the discussion on the involvement of community members in the grammar writing process. Many thanks to those in the audience. We see so many people already. Thank you for joining for this roundtable. During this discussion, we hope to share experiences on writing of grammars of endangered languages. We are thinking of the process of providing written descriptions of the way a language is formally organized with rules and examples. It is surely the desire of every grammar writer that their work will be useful to the community of speakers. In many cases, however, this is not always the case because the grammars have mostly been useful to the scientific community, and native language users are not even aware of the existence of a written grammar of their language. Ideally, a grammar should assist in language preservation and revitalization. It should add value to the language. But why is this not always the case? The first thing that comes to my mind is that most grammars are really intended for the scientific community and therefore would not be highly accessible to non-specialists. They would have a lot of technical and complex terminology and some unfamiliar symbols to the layperson. Also, some grammars are based on the speech of a few speakers. We even know of grammars that have been produced from the speech of a single speaker. So the grammar writer collects like words, phrases, sentences from a speaker and then describes the rules and so on. And this can sometimes happen far away from the language community. For example, the grammar of an African language written by a linguist in Europe or in the US without traveling to Africa where the language is spoken, but based on the way someone who has left that community to Europe or Africa or the US speaks that language. In such a case, the community is not even aware that such a grammar exists. So in this case, that grammar will help the writer to fulfill some academic requirements, but it will not serve the community in any way. We also know that grammars are usually inaccessible for reasons, for example, because it's published abroad or just too expensive for community members who have greater basic needs, such as food and healthcare than grammar books, especially in oral cultures. And in which case, sometimes the people are not literate in the language to be able to exploit such a grammar. So we really wonder how this can change, and how can grammars provide a path to literacy? How can grammars assist in language revitalization and maybe slow down the language endangerment and death? And we see the trend is kind of shifting towards involving communities. We think community involvement appears to be part of the solution. So by getting native speakers involved in the entire process, grammars and other products of language development are more likely to be accepted and used by community members. To share views on this issue today, we have 6 different people in the panel, and I would like to briefly introduce them in alphabetical order, beginning with Azib Amha. So Azib is a researcher, yeah, there she is. Azib is a researcher at the African Studies Center, Leiden University. Her research focuses on the language-culture interface in Ethiopia, especially in members of the Omotic language family. She has extensive experience in language documentation and in working with speech communities. She has led and collaborated in several language documentation projects since 2009. Since 2016, she's working on the multimodal documentation of Zagula, an endangered language spoken in Southwest Ethiopia. Since 2004, Azib is the co-editor of the Journal of African Languages and Linguistics. Thank you, Azib, for joining us from Leiden for this discussion. Next, I would like to introduce Ekwa Campbell. Yes, there she is. Ekwa is a lecturer at the Department of Linguistics, University of Ghana. And her research areas are syntax, discourse analysis, and documentation of Ghanaian languages. In particular, her PhD dissertation was on the grammar of a native Gara language at Rice University in 2017. It is a pleasure to have you join us, Ekwa, from Accra, Ghana.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Our next panelist is Li Jianfu. Yeah,
Yes.
there he is. Li Jianfu is a native speaker of Namuyi Khato, the Kyanjic language of Namuyi Tibetans, found southwest of Sichuan province in the People's Republic of China. He also speaks Chinese, Tibetan, English, and is fluent in Nuo Suyi, a Tibeto-Burman language in Sichuan. He wrote a descriptive grammar of his native Namui as a PhD thesis of La Trobe University in 2007, and currently works as a teacher in Qinghai Normal University in China. Thank you for joining us, Lijian.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you very much.
Next on the list, we have Yankee Modi. Yes, there is Yankee. Yankee is a native member of the Milan community, a small indigenous hill tribe in the eastern Himalaya, Arunachal Pradesh, India. She completed her PhD dissertation, A Grammar of Milan, in 2017 at the Institut für Sprachwissenschaft, University of Bern, and is now co-director of the Center for Cultural Linguistic Diversity, Eastern Himalaya, and an associate lecturer in linguistics at the University of Sydney. Her research primarily focuses on the documentation and description of endangered languages of the Eastern Himalayan region, a highly significant ethno-linguistic hotspot with about 300 typologically diverse languages, many with a few hundred to a few thousand speakers. We're happy to have you to hear more about your work.
Thank you, Pius. Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Stephen Morel. Yes, there is Stephen. Stephen is a member of the Center for Research on Language Diversity and an associate professor in the Department of Languages and Linguistics at La Trobe University. His research focuses on the tribal languages in Assam from both Thai Kadai and Tibeto-Burman families. His research work has been on language documentation with a particular focus on traditional songs and ritual language. He also researches and has written on the Aboriginal languages of Victoria in Australia. We appreciate your effort to join us, although it's quite late for you. So thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Finally, we have Hana Salversi. Yeah, there is Hana. I'm pleased to introduce Hana Salversi of Western Sydney University. Hana has produced a reference grammar of the Papuan language, Nungal, spoken by 1,000 people in Sarawak Mountains of Morobe Province, Papua New Guinea, as well as learning grammars for the endangered Sierra Leonean languages Kim and Bone. She currently holds an Australian Research Council Discovery Early Career Researcher Fellowship, the Marx Institute for Brain, Behavior and Development at Western Sydney University. We appreciate your willingness to join us in this panel to share your experiences working with little known languages in Papua New Guinea and Sierra Leone.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move straight to the discussion. First, it will help us to let our audience know a little bit about the sociolinguistic situation of the language or languages whose grammar we've been involved in writing, including its endangered and under-described state and justification for the need to write the grammar. To begin with this, I would call on Azib Amhara to tell us a little bit about her linguistic her fields of work.
Yes. Thank you for the invitation. I will start by showing the area. Maybe if you could share the pages, the map.
Can you see my map?
Not that one. The previous one up. One slide up. Yes, that one. Yes. So this is the above map. The map on top is Ethiopian Regional Map. So most of you know where Ethiopia is in the Horn of Africa, in the eastern part. of Africa. And so this is a regional map, regional administration. Within each region, there are zones, there are districts, and so on. And the languages I've worked on, except Amharic, where about the writing system and so on, I've done some research on that. But what I have done mainly, my research on is on languages of southwestern Ethiopia. So the map below the regional map is a regional state government that has the most densely populated and linguistically and ethnically the most diverse in Ethiopia. It has many districts, as you could see here. Here in this regional state, I have worked on 4 languages. So the language indicated, the language area indicated by the yellow arrow is where one of my mother tongues, Wolaita, is spoken. So I worked on this language continuously, not writing really a full grammar, not yet, but working on different aspects of its grammatical feature. The one with the red arrow is where Malay is spoken. I have written a grammar of Malay for my PhD thesis based on extensive fieldwork data. And then I did a documentation of Oida, the language with pink arrow. And so there is an extensive archive of Oida in the DOBA's website. And the grammar is not yet written, but various aspects of the language are researched, so work in progress still. And currently I'm engaged in an extensive documentation of Zargula, that is a language, yellow color with black arrow, as you could see in the map. And this is a language I will focus on today in our discussion. Maybe if you could show the next page, it is the same map, but on Google Map, you could see how these languages are spotted in southwestern part, in a little bit of information on the terrain. Yes, I think you can stop sharing the screen. Yes. So the language Dargula, let me talk about it. It is, my guess is about 15,000 speakers. That means low, demographically low relative to languages spoken in the area. There are also even smaller languages than Dargula, but I will justify its endangerment in a while. And there is no clarity about its census. This is 15,000 is my guess. And that is strange given that in Ethiopia, every 10 years, census is taken regularly until 2007. And why is it that the Zargula census not known is related to the linguistic context, the linguistic situation in the area. So in 1994, there was a census published in 1994, and in there, 7,000 ethnic Zargula were reported with 360 native speakers of the language. That was the reason, you know, it's how come that you have such a big, relatively big ethnic group of 7,000 people only with 360 speakers. So that was one alarm for me to start research on, one of the reasons only. But there is some error in there. And the reason is that the Zargula call themselves Gamo. They share ethnic identity with a demographically and socially very influential group that is called Gamo. And they use that same ethnic name to refer to their ethnic identity. And this ethnic identity became very important in the 1990s when Ethiopia's regions were divided into administrative units based on language and ethnicity. And Pius, if you don't mind, just showing that first map for a while, just to indicate what this means. Is that difficult? The thing is, in that map, you see that there are about, so one screen up. Yeah. So in the regional map, the first one, the previous one, yeah. Here you see the regional map includes about 10 regions and 2 city administrations. And each region is defined by language. So the region on the right top in red color is Afar region, where the Afar language is spoken. And just left of that in brown is Tigray region, where Tigrinya is the major language, but Tigrinya is not the only language. There is Irob and other languages here. And the green is Amhara region. More yellow on the right bottom is Somali region, where Somali is prominent. And in the southwest, there isn't a single big lingua franca, so the region was called Southern Nations, Nationalities, and so on. So the point here is that you have about 80 languages, and then you have 10 regions. It means that when you call an area a region, when the government call a region with a prominent language, it means that smaller languages were neglected in educational policy, in administrative issues, and so on. So this is exactly what happened to the Zargula, who were dominated by, within the regional state. The zone belonged to Gamo, so the Zargula were not included in the census that came in 2007. So that is partly the region. We can now leave the screen of the map. So this is significant because it meant that the Zargula were not visible anymore in the federal administration and so on for various things. And combined with their lower demography and there being no linguistic research, very little before that, some word lists and description of specific aspects, the language needed urgent description, the urgent documentation, and that's what I'm doing since 2016. I'll talk more about that later. So I hope this introduces the area and the language context.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Azif. That gives a clear impression of where the work is based. So next, we'll invite Ekwa to tell us also a little bit about where our work is going. Ekwa.
Hello, thank you. And I'd like to thank those watching on YouTube, especially my friends, Professor Ameka and Dr. Esther Manu Bafo. Thanks for coming. So I worked on Ga, which is my native language, for my dissertation. I wrote on grammar of Ga. So Ga, unlike Zargula, for instance, is not endangered. Okay, it has a robust number of speakers. At the last census, the last census for which we have results, which was in 2010, there were 750,000 speakers. One census was just completed, but we're still waiting for the findings. So Ga is spoken in the capital city of Accra. And Pius, if you can please show the map so people can see where Accra is. So Accra is in Ghana, which is in West Africa. And I just want to point it out on the map. It's a coastal region. Okay, so that's Ghana in red. And then it's in West Africa. If you can move to the next slide, please.
Oops.
All right, so that's a language map of Ghana. Ghana has about 51 to 81 languages, depending on your source. Dialects, some people count some languages as dialects of other languages and so on. So the numbers vary, but it has a few languages. And Ga is spoken in that red portion there, in the capital city and surrounding areas. Okay, so the thing about Ga is, although it's spoken by quite a number of people and it's still being passed on to children, it's facing a lot of pressure. And it's facing a lot of pressure because of where its native speakers are. They're in the capital city. It's the go-to city in the country. So there are a lot of immigrants from other parts of the country, people of different ethnic groups who speak different languages, who very regularly move into Accra and bring along their languages. So the Gas have right now become a minority in their own land. So for instance, nationally, they make up just 3% of the population, but within their native region, Accra and surrounding areas, their population is just 18%. The Gas are just 18% of their own region. And the rest are made up of other ethnic groups, the majority of which are the Akan ethnic group, who speak Akan and its various dialects. So the Akans make up about 40% of the population of Accra. So you have this situation where the Gas are in Accra, but they are a minority and their language is not being learned by the incoming immigrants. Rather, their lingua francas like Akan and English, which other ethnic groups are using. So these are the languages of wider communication, Akan and English. And Akan because the Akans make up the largest ethnic group. They're about a little less than half of the population of Ghana is Akan speaking. So when you're in Accra, you may be Ga, but once you leave your home, if you want to speak to someone whose language you do not know, you are likely to use either Akan or English. So this puts a lot of pressure on Ga. It's being bit by bit relegated to the home because once people are outside of that domain, they tend to use Akan or English. Okay. So in terms of pressure or in terms of a retraction of domains, one example is, for instance, if you go to the markets, there's been work done where when you go to a market in Accra, the language that is used most is Akan. And then also in the educational system, all schools are supposed to teach one Ghanaian language, and that language is supposed to be the language of the area in which the school is located. So you would think that in Accra, that would be Ga, but there are several schools now in Accra which are teaching which are teaching Akan. So here again, Ga children do not even have the opportunity to become literate in their own language because they might be going to a school that has decided to teach Akan because they figure the majority of the students there understand Akan better than Ga. So that because of the pressure of Ga and the possibility that it might become endangered in future, I thought that writing a grammar would be helpful. Ga is not undescribed. There's actually been a lot of work, quite a bit of work for an African language anyway on Ga, starting all the way from the mid-19th century with the German missionaries, and then all the way through this past century. There have been several short articles on Ga. Some of them scientific and some of them just readers targeting school children and so on. So there's also a dictionary of Ga, which I helped edit, the second edition. So that having a comprehensive grammar, I thought would be important for a language whose future is generally, I would say it's unknown, right? So. Oh, and I wanted to show some pictures, Pius, if you could go to the next. Yeah, so I just wanted to show how densely populated Accra is. So you're looking at a market in the central district, and although I don't know any of the people there, I can assure you that a majority of them are speaking Akan, or they are native Akan speakers and not native Ga speakers, although that is Ga land. Yeah, so, and yeah, so it's a very urban, sprawling area and very multicultural now. So it's good, but then it's putting pressure on Ga. So Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ikwa. That also gives us a clear view of the situation of Ga and really justifies the need for the grammar. Next, we would ask Li Jiangfu to tell us a little bit about his language.
Thank you, Pius. And hi, everyone who's watching. The language I'm working on is called Namjikato, and the group of people who speak the language is called Namji. So the language we call Namjikato. So the language is spoken by about 5,000 to 10,000 speakers only, and it's spoken southwest of Sichuan in China. Yesterday I sent you a picture. Yes, I don't know if you have it there. Hopefully that will give a sense where it is spoken. So the area where the language is spoken, yes, from this. So that's the Sichuan province, the bigger part of features Sichuan province in China, and there's a red dot on that. In that within that Sichuan province, that is the area where the language is spoken, and that is also, I think it's important. It's easier to understand if I mention that everybody know. I think there are two long rivers in China, which are Yellow River and Yangtze River. So that red spot is actually along a river, small river, which is a tributary, a small branch of this Yangtze River. So it's a curve along this Yangtze River. So that's about where it is spoken in the language. And yeah. So by giving the language context, I want first by sharing my experience of speaking using this language to help you understand. So my home is located in a valley under a foot of mountain. So just where the language domain. So like we only speak the language at home, basically. So that means if we step out of this door, so we have there's another ethnic group called Yi, which is one of the 56 ethnic groups in China. So on the left of my family, there's a Yi neighbor, and on the right, there are two Yi neighbors families. So at home, we speak our language, Namjikato, and as we step out of the door, then there's a creek or small river where we share, you know. When I was a child, I remember it clearly. My mom just, spending hours time outside when she was fetching the water and forgot her fire at home. Then my father would complain, like, forgot her. Because my mom was talking with the Yi neighbor, Yi language, the mostly Yi language. So that's where the language is just surrounded by the Yi out of the door. Then by 5 minutes walking, I guess, then in front of us, there's a public road. Then that public road takes us to the town where we have Sichuan Chinese people, right? The Sichuan province is on the map earlier. So then people go there and they speak Sichuan Chinese dialect when they go shopping. That's about like 30 minutes driving from the village to the town. Then in about another 30 minutes driving in the car to the city, and a city called Xichang. Then at that place, people start using we call 普通话 in Chinese. That is Mandarin. So by sharing this, I hope we have a little bit sense of Namjikato's linguistic context. Basically, it's quite multi linguistic. It's surrounded by immediately with the Yi language and Sichuan dialect, then 普通话 the Mandarin. So that's the language. Then so today the villagers, so general villagers in the village, do a lot of exchange, labor exchange, meaning like my family members, if we have some work to do, our neighbor people would come and help us, during the day life. Then of course the language we use is e-language, and then we go shopping. Then we do this Chinese language for the general visitors. But students, another type of interesting group here I want to talk is like in my niece, nephews generation. They go to kindergarten today, primary school, middle school, then all the way through to university. So the language used there is Chinese Putonghua. So which means the Namji language is not used. We only have this language domain at home, exact only at home. So that's about this context. Then I would say this language is highly endangered because of this points I already mentioned earlier, but also from the national level of country, we have this policy of pushing the Putonghua, we call that the Mandarin. Government policy supports everyone or encourage everyone, even from the children kindergarten, to use the Putonghua, the Mandarin, and encourage the kids to learn this Putonghua. But at the same time, it's interesting point is scholars, of course, leaders in this country also promote that we should protect languages and heritages of minority groups. See, so it's a parallel. It's like simultaneous, but still, I would say it's very highly endangered because of under this big dominant language of Sichuan dialect, and then the language around us. So that's that's all about. Yes, hope you listen. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, obviously, language under the influence of bigger languages like that, whose domains of use are mostly reduced to the home, is actually in serious danger. So having a grammar for such a language is certainly going to be very helpful. Thank you. Next, we'll ask Yankee to tell us a little bit about Milan.
Thank you, Pius. Yeah, thank you, Pius. Thank you, ILARA, for having me. Pius, can I have the map on the screen, please? Okay, so while waiting for the map, I'll introduce my language. So I have mostly worked on a language called Milang, which is an indigenous language spoken in the Eastern Himalaya. This is northeast part of India, Eastern Himalaya, border to Tibet. Okay, so this is also the language of my tribe, and I'm a Milang person, though I grew up without speaking Milang at all. So you can see that Milang is a very small language group. So the area, you can see the area is quite small, the little circle there. So we have about 2,000 speakers of Milang in the village. We basically have 3 villages, Pakumodi, Galbung, and Holland, the 3 main villages, and about 2,000 speakers. You will find them in the village, and again, about 2,000 speakers outside of the village. And like me, it's sure that they won't be speaking the language. Okay, one of the distinct thing that you would notice about Milang is surrounded by a much powerful in terms of population, in terms of groups. The villages are surrounded by other language speakers. Okay, so you might want to know that how Milang has managed to survive for so long. And I'll tell you, Milang had a secret, and that secret was Milang had control over a mountain where they could harvest aconite. And aconite is the main ingredient in our area to make arrow poison. Okay, so Milang controlled the trade of arrow poison. Now that was very powerful in the past. That was like a small nation having the, it was like a small nation that is nuclear, that has nuclear, okay, nuclear power. Yeah, but things have changed. It's not the same. Econite is not the most important commodities anymore. At present, instead, Milang people have, they have to face a choice. You can either live in the village, continue speaking the language, pass on to your children, but in order to do that, you have to only depend on subsistence agriculture. There are no other economic possibilities. But if you want to have other economic possibilities, like you want to become a doctor, you want to be, you want to go to a university, or an engineer, become a linguist, then you have to move out. And when you move out, you have to leave your language behind. And that's exactly what my father did. And that's how I grew up as a Milang, only speaking other people's language. Okay, so for me, writing a grammar of Milang was a very personal decision. It was like both ways of trying to learn in the process of writing grammar, trying to learn the language of my own people, and at the same time, having a linguistic degree and trying to do something for my own people. Yeah, that's my story. Thank you, Pius.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story, which kind of reflects what happens to so many people who have had to move out of the community for various reasons. And by so doing, they use the language less, or even stop using it altogether. And for getting back into the language, doing the grammar and learning the language is really a wonderful thing you've been able to do. So we look forward to hearing more about your experience. Next, we will invite Stephen to tell us about his own languages and yeah. Stephen?
Right, yes. So I hope you can hear me. Can you share the screen with the maps that I produced? But I should start off by saying that I was brought up as a monolingual English speaker in the suburbs of Melbourne in Australia. And so I'm not and have not been studying the languages that I myself have grown up speaking. And this is perhaps a different situation from the other people many of the other people that are speaking here tonight. So for the last 25 years, I have been researching languages in two different parts of the world. So first of all, I'll talk about Northeast India, and then for the last couple of years, also Myanmar or Burma, which became open for people like me to go and do language research in the middle of the 2010s. Of course, the situation right now is not good there. And over those years, I've researched the Thai, Singapore, Tangsa, and Wancho languages, and I've put those names on the screen there so that you could see them. And then next to the names of Thai, Tangsa, and Wancho, I've put some scripts. So the Thais have their traditional scripts, and I will talk about this later because the scripts are important. And the Tangsa and Wancho languages have more recently created scripts. And I've got a story to tell there too about working with community members on that. So the languages that I have been studying for the last 25 years, and there are many, and I haven't time to talk about all of them in the wonderfully interesting detail that we have just heard about the other languages. Some are languages that have not been spoken for many years, such as Dayahom. Some are languages spoken only by older people, such as Dai Kam Yang, not being learned by children. Some are being learned by children, but losing or have already lost some of their registers, such as traditional songs. And for this, the example of Dayai Ton I can use. And there are languages spoken actively, but due to reasons such as relatively recent religious conversion, people may have put aside some of the registers such as ritual and traditional songs. And this is a situation in some of the Tangsa communities. But for all of the languages that I'm talking about, the Thai, the Tangsa, the Singpo, and the Wancho, with the exception of the Tayahom, who are a very large community, but who no longer speak their language. And their language now survives in manuscripts, which also need to be researched and preserved. But for these other communities, there would be rarely more than a couple of thousand speakers per language, maybe 5, or maybe in some cases as many as 10, but not very often many more than that. Very few, if any, monolingual speakers remaining, and people speak multiple languages, including sometimes the languages of neighboring villages or the languages of wider communication, which are often from a different language family. So if, for example, you are a Tayaiton speaker growing up in Balipotar village, you will learn Tayaiton because that's your mother tongue. It may well be that, in fact, one of your parents is a speaker of Taitrung, which is a Sino-Tibetan language, Tibeto-Burman language, but you will also learn and grow up speaking Assamese, which is the language of wider communication, at least that. This is a very different situation from what I grew up with. So these languages are valued much by their community members, but it's not often easy for people to know how to do the work of language preservation. I have a lot of discussions now on Facebook and WhatsApp about these issues with many people in different parts of Northeast India. They're facing challenges from small numbers, the pressure to use languages of wider communication such as Assamese and Burmese, pressure to create larger, more standardized versions of the languages for long-term preservation. So if you have, for example, the multiple different varieties of Tangsa language spoken on the India side or Tangshang on the Myanmar side, maybe the languages will be safer if people choose to use one of the varieties, kind of standardize that. But this itself represents both an opportunity perhaps and a threat. So that is one of the areas that I've been working on. But Pius, if you don't mind moving to the next slide. So I have, since I was a teenager, and that's a very long time ago now, also had an interest in the Indigenous or Aboriginal languages of the state of Victoria where I live. And this work has been done, the work that I have been doing on this for most of the last 25 years was mostly done by consulting old manuscripts, because these languages haven't been spoken as mother tongue for a very long time. The speakers now speak English and they belong to disadvantaged communities by and large. So the ones that I've worked on particularly, you probably can't see on the map, but Wati Wati up in the northwest, Woiwurrung in the Melbourne area, Yota Yota on the Murray River, to name but 3. But now there is increasing interest in community members and an increasing need to work with community members to advance the recovery of these languages and understanding of the grammatical structure by collaborative work. And I'll speak more about that in the longer session next. So I hope that's enough of an introduction of these languages to be going on with.
Yes, Stephen. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we want to hear from Hana about also her field, her field area, the languages she's been working on. So, Hana?
Yeah, sure. Pius, could you pull up the map, please?
Yeah.
So, for me, I'd like to talk about 2 grammar projects, and in a way they're sort of polar opposites, so I hope that's instructive in a way. With my first entry into the world of grammar writing and linguistic fieldwork was really as sort of an apprentice to Tucker Childs of the late Tucker Childs of Portland State University, who hired me as a research assistant to work on a documentation project of 2 languages of Sierra Leone. And this was Tucker's, sort of his life's work was going through methodically and documenting, describing, and writing grammars of all of the Bulom languages of the South Atlantic language family. So he started in Liberia with Kisi, and then he moved into Sierra Leone and worked on Mani, and Kimenbom was his third major grammar project and documentation project. And I was lucky enough to sort of apprentice to him on this. We worked for 10 months in the field with Ali Toure, who was my co-research assistant. And we really worked with only the elderly. When we were in the field, there was no one under 40 for sure who was speaking Bom, and probably under 50 who was speaking Kim. There were only about 30 speakers of Kim, and maybe about twice that number, a bit more, of Bom still alive. Neither language was used on a daily basis anymore. And so writing the grammar was really an urgent need for the communities themselves, which were under extreme duress about 6 years out of a civil war. So grammar writing and language was probably one of the last things on sort of on their needs list at that time. But in the future, hopefully this will change. So documenting the heritage before the last elderly speakers passed away was a really urgent need. And today there may be no more living Kim speakers. It's a bit unclear. There may be a handful, maybe one or two. The other project that I've been working on that I did for my PhD and beyond was almost the polar opposite. So this was to work on a very vibrant language of Papua New Guinea. Again, not spoken by a huge number of people, but this is sort of par for the course in Papua New Guinea, which is the most linguistically diverse nation in the world. Over 10% of the world's languages, living languages, are spoken in Papua New Guinea. So the language that I wrote a grammar of, a reference grammar of, is called Nuon, and it's spoken by about 1,000 people in mountain villages of Northeast Papua New Guinea. You can see on the map, Papua New Guinea is in red, and then there's this inset, and the province in which Nuon is spoken, the Morobe province, is in red there as well. So this language is very vibrant. It's the first language of children growing up in the villages. It's the main language used in almost all spheres in the village region, except the upper primary school, where the Papua New Guinean, one of the lingua francas of Papua New Guinea called Tokpisin, an English-based Creole, is used, and a bit of English, and the church where Tokpisin is also used alongside Nuon. Children who are older than about 7 and adults who are younger than about 35 who attended the local school are literate in Nuon. And then from there, they easily gain literacy in Tokpisin as well. And this is all because of the very admirable work of my adopted sister-in-law, Annie Ogate, and her teacher colleagues who are local teachers. So Nuon is a very vibrant language, but all this said, because of the small number of speakers, this language group is always, let's say, a few sort of migrants to the urban fringe away from losing its footing. It's also possible that the communities even within the villages could eventually shift to using Tokpisin due to its prestigious association with urban settings, church, and education. So writing this grammar, I had a very fortunate situation of being able to work with a very vibrant community. And it's just a lovely thing for a linguist and a community to be able to document all spheres in which language is used and all the sort of magnificent complexity of a vibrant language in action. So that was a wonderful opportunity in working on the Nuon language. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Hana. Maybe you just can move on from there to tell us a little bit about your approaches, about your practices. For example, like how this involvement of the community members was actually made to happen. If yes. You can tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I think it was very different in both of these projects, and that's really by design, but also by necessity, I think, because of the different character. So for Bom and Kim, there was no invitation from the community. This was really sort of a science or academia-driven project. It was, again, Tucker Child's, it was his life work to go through and write grammars of all of these related languages, and he ended up completing that just before his death, actually. We ended up working with the few remaining elderly speakers of Kim. All of them were involved in our project, which was lovely. We would travel from village to village looking for speakers of these languages, talking to people, finding out who the speakers were. And sometimes we had to do a bit of scouting ourselves. Speakers would record stories, conversations, and songs, and then we worked with them to accurately transcribe these recordings. And of all these speakers, most of them have very little formal education. So there was just one speaker who had actually been educated in sort of a colonial era in Nigeria, and he ended up working with us on more of the nuts and bolts of the structure of the language, and really would sit with us for long periods. But overall, I still would say that the community was involved in this project. It was one of celebration. It was one of the only times that these languages were celebrated. Video recording sessions were held with just the elderly as participants, and these were people who were actually quite marginalized. The language was laughed at by the younger generations when we were there. They said it sounds like monkey language. And then we were sort of coming in and celebrating these people who had been ashamed to speak the languages in front of their descendants for some time. So it was really a very joyous act, it seemed to me, to be involved with the speakers in this way. But I can't say that the community really took a very active role in shaping the way the actual grammar came out for the scientific community. That said, I ended up putting together a sort of picture dictionary based, two picture dictionary based pedagogical grammars for the community. And those included like basic conversations as well as illustrations of different names for fish and that sort of thing. It's really hard to assess how those ended up being used after the 10 months we were there, but they're there for community members, and we have them in digital format. So hopefully, I would hope that descendants of the last Kim speakers and the last Bon speakers would be able to find accessible entry into their languages through those materials. So with the Nuon language, I'll just say it's quite a different situation. In this case, there was an invitation from the community. So the community was familiar with sort of Bible translation type linguistic work in Papua New Guinea that had been done on a neighboring language. And they were eager to have, local leaders were eager to have their own language be described in a similar way, in part to establish how it differed from that other language, which the outside person working on that other language sort of wanted to take that other language, as Stephen sort of described, and make it a sort of high German variety that could be used by everyone in the area, and that wasn't necessarily accepted by local community. So this was this invitation was facilitated by a man called Gabriel Pourlat, who's a biologist and from another province in Papua New Guinea, but he was the other person besides me in recent times to learn the local language of this community, so to learn to speak Nuon during his biological research. He facilitated the invitation. We were PhD students together at the same university, and so my PhD project was to write this grammar of Nuon. Now, I ended up deciding to do monolingual fieldwork for my PhD dissertation, and I'd done this in sort of chunks before, but I really wanted to see how this would work for my PhD dissertation, in part because I thought it made sense, but in part I felt out of respect for the local language to maintain its prestige, that I, as an outsider who might look like previous colonial sort of occupiers of the land, was coming in and very humbly learning the language like a child in the village setting. So I want to say that I did do monolingual fieldwork, of course, after a bit of going through the necessary preliminaries about who I was and why I was there in a contact language, just so people knew. But I think that my monolingual approach necessarily limited sort of broader community involvement in the early stages of grammatical research, because if you're not really a competent speaker, you don't command a whole lot of authority to be able to summon everyone together and speak publicly all the time and that sort of thing. So I had a low profile in the early stages of my grammatical research. But eventually, once I did have the grammar finalized as my PhD dissertation, I did end up coming back and running a grammar workshop for the community, which was very well received. I put out a sort of a Nuon language version of parts of the grammar, spiral bound, that was distributed at the workshop, and that was well received. We hope to keep doing those things. I've been working with local teachers a bit, although need to do much more. And overall, my connection to the community has been one of language, yes, but there's also this sort of longer term familial type relationship that I have with them. In the early stages of the research, one of my adopted brothers there told me that I'm a bridge. He said, "You're a bridge for us." And so a bridge not just to the outside world, but sort of to, not just to language, but also to the outside world and to all sorts of other things, so that I'm a conduit for all sorts of things, not just language and linguistic materials. And I'll just say that since working on the grammar itself, I've been working with the community actually much more intensively, and it's much more a community-based enterprise since then. So after that initial monolingual work on the grammar, and I only speak the language when I'm in the community. That's just a basic tenet that I hold. There's no reason for me to use a contact language now anyway. But I've been working with a number of very, very skilled young people in the area to document the way children learn the language. So we've done some really involved longitudinal studies of children learning the language, and that's largely run by the community. So I'm mostly in absence for those. And it's through their efforts that Nuon became the first Pacific language of the whole Pacific region to be placed on this international database of child language research, CHILDIS. So it's really due to that community involvement. I couldn't have done that myself. And since then, I've also brought a group of non-field linguist colleagues to run psycholinguistics and cognition experiments. And the community effort involved in hosting that group of people and their experiments was massive. I mean, people took 2 weeks off from all their everyday activities, which are really significant. Their subsistence, smallholder agriculturalists. They took 2 weeks off from all their activities to sort of host this experiments and these group of people. It was really a big deal, and that was, again, just a massive community effort and community involvement, scaffolding that small group of sort of scientific research projects. So it's a bit unfortunate to me in a way, because I like being unobtrusive and I like being sort of a child at the feet of elders and learning the language and that sort of thing. But I've found that as I'm no longer a student myself, as I'm no longer a research assistant, it's these, especially the project with Nuon, has become much more of a large community enterprise, and I'm just sort of a cog in the wheel, and sometimes I'm directing more than I'd like to be just sitting at someone's feet in a field and listening to them name plants, and I'm not always doing that. But the community involvement has just grown and grown, and I think it's finally almost to the point where some young people who have gone up to the 10th grade and beyond are taking charge of some of the aspects of it.
This is wonderful, wonderful experiences. I mean, just whether it's celebrating language, getting people to see value in their language and to celebrate it, or producing pedagogical grammars, or even going back to the community after completing, say, your PhD, creating this lifelong connection with the community and assisting them in the entire language revitalization process. This is so wonderful, and we are really happy to hear this. Before we move on to Stephen to hear about his own involvement, we just want to invite those in the audience, if you have any comments, you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will we'll address those as we proceed. So, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit how community members became involved in your projects? Any training opportunities? Were there any formal collaborations?
Yes. So 25 years ago, when I started my research in Northeast India, there was even less emphasis on community in linguistics than there is today. The points that you were raising at the beginning of this session, Pius, were perhaps even less important then. But I started my work in the Taipake community of Northeast India in an unusual way, because this is a community that has a traditional writing system, but they did not at that time have a way of printing it, because there was no what we used to call a printing block, or what we described as a computer printing block, which we would now call a font. So the first thing that I did after discussion with community members was to make a font for the language so that people could use it to print books. Now, this is interesting because at that time, it was quite difficult to even persuade some other members of the linguistic community that the writing, the traditional writing of these communities, was something that should be included in things like academic articles or PhD theses. I won't say that everybody was calling this a problem, but many people used to say to me, but why do you need to have the traditional writing in this article or this, this grammar that you are writing? Because it's only going to be read by other linguists who can't read this traditional script. And I think we have changed. I think we have moved forward on that a long way. So there's a number of sort of in aspects of working with the script that have gone on throughout my career. So more recently, I've got involved in making proposals to the Unicode Corporation. This is a big international corporation based on the west coast of the United States, which decides what scripts will be able to be typed in on computers in places like Facebook and so on. You need to have your script included in Unicode if you want to be able to send messages in Facebook. So this has been an opportunity to learn a little bit about the way that some technical people think, but also to work with communities to produce proposals to get their scripts included in Unicode or to get additional information, add new letters that we've discovered in manuscripts or that are needed for various purposes. And this kind of work is now very much something that is going on, via the internet, via Facebook, via WhatsApp, via discussions that I'm having on an almost daily basis about these kinds of things. So while the grammar that I wrote of the Thai languages, the very first one that I wrote, was basically an academic work, there was another thing that I insisted on doing in it, and I did this in discussion with the community members, and that was to make sure that the utterances that were included as examples in the grammar were ascribed, were named to the people who said them. Because in discussing this with members of the community, they said, well, look, in 20 years' time, in 50 years' time, when we read this, we would like to know who said the thing that contained the grammatical feature that you are talking about, because that will be something that will help us in the future, will help our children and grandchildren to understand what is the strength, what is the value of these particular utterances. So many, many different projects have been going on in a range of different languages over the last 25 years. I want to mention a couple in particular. I've already talked about the scripts, but one thing that I did quite early on was to take a dictionary that was published by a scholar from Thailand, Dr. Bunchop, and enter the data into a computer. And I did this so that Dr. Bunchop's dictionary could be printed at some point in the future. But about 15 years ago, Ailot Hailong, one of the members of that community, decided that he would take on the task of expanding the 5,000 entries that Dr. Bunchop had produced. And just in the last week, Ailot has finally finished this dictionary. We now have something like 16,000 head words and an uncountable number of sentence examples and so on. And we're about to go to the point of putting this onto the internet and also making a mobile phone application of it. The other thing that I wanted to mention here, because I don't want to talk for too long, apart from the sort of continued work of working with various communities over Facebook, because I can't travel anywhere at the moment. I'm, in fact, not allowed to leave the house at the moment. That's because we're under quarantine in our house right this week, but still able to do a great deal of work over the internet, discussing and gradually building up dictionaries and other materials that can be used by the community in the future. But I wanted to just switch the focus to briefly talk about the situation in Australia, in southeastern Australia. And an example of something which I think may be a thing of the future. So the grammar of the Mati Mati and Wati Wati languages spoken up on the Murray River in the northwest of Victoria and across the border in New South Wales, this was written entirely from, particularly the Wati Wati section, entirely from 19th century manuscript sources. There was one speaker of Mati Mati still living in the 1960s who was recorded, for whom there are sound recordings by the late Louise Hercus, my dear friend. So his name was Jack Long, but there was nobody in the 1960s who could speak Wati Wati. So we're reliant entirely on the early sources. So we put together this grammar and published it and then took it up to the community. I remember with some nervousness meeting community members for the first time. This is after the grammar is published. And one of the community members, he said to me on that occasion, he said, some members of our community feel that you should have consulted us before writing this, but I'm really happy that you have done this because it exists as a resource and now we can make it ours. Now, the process of making it ours is something that Brendan, that's the guy's name, and I have been working on. We now meet every Thursday morning. I know it's Thursday morning for some of you, but it's not here. So this is about 12 hours ago now. We meet every Thursday morning and we are translating traditional stories back into language. It's a very slow and comprehensive process, but it's part of the process of returning the academic knowledge to the community and making it more accessible. Look, I think I'll stop this part there, and because there's many more people to speak.
Thank you, Stephen. We see at the bottom of it all, the desire to get the community involved, to return part of what is you produce to the community, to get them appropriate all of that and to be able to use for revitalization of the languages. Thank you so much. Yeah, maybe we can, we have some questions in the chat. We will come to these. We have a question from Felix Ameka, another one from Mark van der Velde. We will come to these shortly. After we hear from Modi, from Yankee, how her own involvement with her community has been, especially in her case where she has also had the intention of learning what was supposed to be her mother tongue.
Okay,
by working on
thank you, Pius. Yeah, so in my case, it will be slightly different from what Hana and Stephen's position was, because I really didn't need to, I don't need an invitation to work in my own tribe. I don't need it, but I pretend that I did because some so-called ethics board wanted it. And now I'm telling live, I pretend it. Okay, that set aside, during my fieldwork, it was not difficult for me to find community members who would just turn up, who would just turn up because they wanted, some of them would be just volunteers, and some of them would be just curious about, what I was doing, why I was doing, and why I'm big in these villages that people have. People doesn't even want to come back, and that there would be people with all this, they will have genuine interest about the works that I was trying to do. And as I went on to work on also in other language groups in that area, I met several people, in at least in this part of the region. People are indigenous people, very often in literature, you would see they're just succumbing to, whatever pressures that is around the world, right? But if you come to this area, you will have different pictures of indigenous people. People are not succumbing. There are lots of people who are trying to understand what's happening with their community, with their world. And trying to find a way to adapt. And during my field work, I found so many people who were just working on their own for many years without any support, without any help. People who are just they just, they are very aware of who they are and why they want, what they value, and particularly language. And this issue is not something, somebody just came, walk into my village and started talking about it. We are very aware of it. We discuss it vigorously, debate it all the time among ourselves. Okay, so since I know that there are lots of people in the villages that who are interested working on their languages. So in 2015, along with some support from Firebird Foundation for Anthropological Linguistics, and also support from colleagues that are working in this area, we started running a training program called Trickle. So Trickle stands for Training and Resources for Indigenous Community Linguists. So here we support any community member who is interested to work in their language. And we run this program in the village. Yeah, so that's the story beginning, and I hope that's where we'll start the involvement of community members working together with people who, have different skill sets working together. That's my story. Thank you, Pius.
Yeah. Thank you, Yankee. That is, when we hear about such a community with so much interest in their language, we know there is a future for this language, for this community. Thank you so much. We would then ask Li Jianfu to tell us also a little bit about his own community involvement experiences.
Thank you. Yes. So my case, I would also say it's a little similar to Yankee's, because I'm a native speaker of this language, Namizikato. So I had no problems of finding people to record. I myself, I speak the language well. So from that part, I had no problem. My problem here is that in Chinese we have a saying, 半路出家. 半路出家 means you became a monk on the way. At the beginning, you didn't plan to become a monk, but on the way, because of some reasons, you become a monk. So my situation is more like this. I didn't do linguistics, a master in linguistics. I just directly commit PhD in linguistics. So which means I like this linguistic knowledge, deep understanding of this linguistic framework, theories, basic terminologies. Those things I had very hard time doing that. So how did I face this? How did I solve this here? Like I have three methods. First is I try to read many reference grammars done by other linguists, mostly by native English speakers. I remember in Latrobe, he was working with, just flipping through all the stack of reference grammar books in the library. So mainly the purpose is to want to know how other people have done on writing, how other people have done on, have written a grammar of endangered language, because I hadn't done that. So for me, it's doing this descriptive grammar of Namizikato is also same time learning, a process of learning. It's like doing my MA linguistics again, same time, and at the same time trying to figure out all these complicated rules for linguistic terminologies, and I needed to learn one by one. So that's the challenge. So first thing I did is I just used a lot of reference grammars. I particularly remember one work done by Alex Michaud, whose work is working on Na is also another language spoken in China, Yunnan. So he has done really important work on the tone of that language. And by reading that, gave me this idea. Because before I was having a hard time to figure out the tone system in Namji language. Steve, that we had a hard time to try to figure out. So it's been months after months. Then after I had that, read that, it's really given me new ideas. And I found that usually now most syllables have, one syllable has one tone, but because of reading that with that assistance, I found some syllables very special. They have two tones actually, depending on different situations. So this kind of problem or challenge, I would say, is by using this, by reading other people's great work on grammar. So that's one. Then another approach or method I use is data analysis. I transcribe a story. It's a long story. It's like about 2 hours. I put it on a software called Flex, and I suppose everyone who has done work on the linguistics will know the Flex. Many people use linguistics. So I transcribed that. I did a lot of transcribing by using that Flex. That was very useful for me to help me to figure out the rules, complicated matters in the Namji language. Then another one is contrastive analysis, I would say, that I used during my grammar writings. I like when I have something I didn't understand, I could find, for example, the term nominalizer. So when I was not sure what was the nominalizer in Namji, I would go find in my head, because I'm a multilingual person, so I speak Tibetan, Chinese, English, right, and also Yi, as I mentioned earlier. So I have this several languages. I can, when I think of, does this language have a nominalizer, or in Tibetan, Chinese, like by comparing them, it's really helped me to grasp or to pin down, what a nominalizer is. So that's the three approaches or methods I used in my case, I would say. So hopefully I did introduce enough. Thank you here.
Okay, thank you, Lee Jianfu. We will be back to you to check how you got maybe to work closely with community members if this was the case. To proceed, let us hear from Ekwa. What were your own experiences with community members during your grammar writing process?
Okay, thank you. Yes, so as a native speaker, I was mulling the question of what to write for my dissertation. Should I just work on some aspect of the language? I like grammar, so maybe some aspect of the grammar, or should I just write one comprehensive grammar? And I must say that I felt a responsibility to write a full grammar. I felt almost like I would feel guilty if I did not write a grammar, because I mentioned earlier that there's been quite a few works on Ga in the forms of journal articles and a dictionary and so on. But I thought that it would be good to have natural samples of the language and to analyze the language as it was spoken presently based on the speech that was produced by speakers in their natural environment. So my approach was to gather natural data from Ga speakers as much as possible, because most of the previous work had been done by mostly elicitation and kind of one-on-one consultations with single native speakers at the time. And also writing a grammar would be beneficial for me, as I would get to be familiar with all the different issues in the syntax of the language. So that's how I settled on writing the grammar. So I went about And since I'm a native speaker, coming or getting in touch with speakers was very easy. I had family members who lived right in the heart of the Ga region, the area where Ga is spoken, is concentrated. So I would go to like the family house, and it's what we call the compound house. It's a large living area, and there are different rooms, different kind of little apartments where different families would live. Most of them will be related. Some of them will be tenants who are not family members. So that was kind of where I was grounded. And so people would come to speak to me. Sometimes I would say, oh, you know, I've spoken to a lot of women now, maybe I should get some men. And then they would go and grab me, people, younger men, older men. It was actually quite easy because of course they know me, I'm their niece, I'm their sister. So getting people involved wasn't difficult at all. And then also I could easily get permission to go to witness people's private ceremonies, for instance, baby naming ceremonies, twin festivals, annual festivals, the Homowa Festival. I went to a church and recorded a sermon. I had people come over and tell stories, which I recorded, and so on. So that's mainly how they got involved, just being my source of data. I wanted it to be based mostly on the language as produced by speakers in as natural an environment as you can get when you have a recorder and you're asking people to sign things and giving you permission. So yeah, that was the main approach. But then also I had to do some one-on-one consultation with friends and family members, you know, where I would directly ask them about their judgments on some aspects of the language. And what I found was that they were quite fascinated about what I was doing, especially when I would tell them that I'm writing a grammar. I mean, this just wowed them. They said, does Ga have a grammar? Because, you know, in school, we learn English grammar. If there's a French teacher in your school, you might learn French grammar. So the perception is that grammars are for, you know, these international prestigious languages. And some would just not believe that Ga had a grammar. They said, how is that possible? And so I would have to be a teacher for a little bit and explain to them about, you know, the rules that govern language, and that if there weren't those rules, then we wouldn't be able to understand each other. So I was happy that I was able to get them to see their language or our language in a new light, and to raise the profile of the language and then the prestige of the language, and help them to see that our language Ga can do everything that English can do if we just, you know, give it the same respect, the same value, and use it more often, and also use it more often with our children, because some of them, because they value English so much, some speakers, because they value English so much above all the other languages, including their own native language, from childhood, they're speaking to their children in English. And that's another way in which the language is losing speakers. Yes, but in terms of whether the grammar is actually being used by native speakers, I have to confess that I don't know, and I don't think it is very useful outside of the academic community. What is very useful for speakers, based on the feedback and the interactions I have often, is the Ga dictionary that Professor Mariesta Dakubu wrote, and that we edited and expanded about 10 years ago. So in schools that teach Ga, this dictionary is very important to them. Once it's stocked in the university bookshop, it flies off the shelves. because the parents want it because they know it helps their children with Ga literacy, the Ga subject. And just people who are passionate about Ga language preservation and promotion, they do get in touch with me and tell me about how helpful the dictionary is. And of course, they also tell me, oh, but I think you made a mistake here, or you left this out, you know, in this section and so on. So the dictionary gets much more engagement from the community than the grammar I wrote. But the grammar is more useful to kind of language aficionados, teachers, and radio presenters. They tend to read it because these are the Ga radio presenters, the Ga language radio presenters, because they want to improve upon their Ga, and they want new vocabulary, and they are more code switching to English and so on. Yeah, so I would say that they were very involved in as much as they provided the main data for the dissertation. But in terms of giving back, I haven't been able to do that with the grammar as much as I have with the dictionary. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ikwa. Yeah, quite fascinating when people get to know that their own language is actually as important as other languages. So it even has a grammar of its own. And this raises the profile of the language and can, you know, encourage people to value the language and to be excited about learning it and using it. So finally, we want to hear from Azib, if you can tell us also about your own experiences.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Pius. Yes, my experience is slightly different from earlier ones. I started initially with my mother tongue, trying to learn as a student of Addis Ababa University, working on Wolaita, one of my two mother tongue languages. And when I graduated, I was employed at the university. And at that time, there was among my teachers a concern about Ethiopian languages. There are grammars and dictionaries on a few languages like Amharic, Oromo, relatively also my mother tongue, Wolaita, was described in various forms. But there were a number of languages for which there is not even a word list. So the headed by Professor Klaus Wedekind from Germany, who was one of our teachers, and people like Professor Baye from Ethiopia. There was a project on little known Ethiopian languages. So we young staff members had to go out on fieldwork and do a survey, collect a word list and a few sentences pre-prepared. And so I was engaged in that survey, and I was sent to do a survey on Mali. I did a survey on Mali. And then after that, when I was trying to get a PhD education, one of my professors suggested not to write on your own language, Wolaita, which is relatively known. So choose among one of these little known languages in the survey. So I, in consultation with colleagues who also later offered me a position at Leiden University, Professor Dimenda, we had back and forth discussion, like better to work on a mother tongue, but also field experience on Mali, which would also enhance the language. So I decided to work on Mali. I did a grammar, and the people, when I sent the grammar, the copy of the grammar, it was precious for them. I cannot say they used it as such, but holding it, especially looking at stories recorded, and when people or myself could read the transcription of the stories of some biographies and so on, people were interested. People were interested in the grammar, but I cannot say how useful it is for community members as such. But I must say also Mali was one of my gateway to do research on further Ometo languages. So the languages, 4 languages I mentioned to you earlier in which I worked, including my mother tongue Wolaita, they all belong to a language cluster that's called Ometo. And I was personally interested in learning things from different branches and to compare with the structure of Mali and Wolaita, which at that point I knew really well. And so I came to Zargulla in that idea, but not to do the whole grammar, but to focus on modality. The verbal structure was very interesting. We can't talk about it in detail here, but I had a desire to work on modality and so on. So I came to Zargulla area, and first I had to get a permit from the district. And as I told you earlier, there was language politics. There is a bigger language that is called the Gamo, which was dominant in the area. And so these people were in the administration, and they told me, there is no language called Zargulla in this area. You cannot do research on that. You rather do on Gamo. And Gamo is mutually intelligible with my mother tongue. So I was not interested in that. So anyway, somehow I convinced them, because we sat with this administrator who said there is no Zargulla. I said, okay, then give me Gamo speakers from Zargulla area, and then you yourself as a native speaker, let's have a conversation. So I started asking word list and some sentences, and I think the guy was genuine maybe in thinking that there is no Zargulla. And he started to get slowly amazed. Oh, you say it that way, and so on and so on. So there was, these languages are totally distinct, not mutually intelligible, but they, because of political interest, various historical reasons, they just merged them. And the Zargulla had no say in at that time. Gamo was given to Zargulla children as mother tongue for education in primary school, and the people just were going through that. There is no problem in that as such, but there are considerations about the people being not visible, young children learning the other language, and Zargulla losing its ground among young children, and relegated more and more to a home language and so on. And so I went to the village. After that, I got a permit to go to Zargulla area, and directly I went to school, because there you find teachers who speak the language, and they helped me. And more and more I saw that there is, a few years after that, that was early 2005, and then as I worked on, I realized that we need really a more comprehensive kind of documentation on this language, collect all kinds of stories. At that point, my project was really targeting a specific area of the grammar, but I thought we need a kind of extensive archiving of, different, the way of life of the people, their day-to-day life. At that point, I didn't have the facilities also to do proper recording, like cameras were scarce. I had an audio camera, but I didn't have a video camera, and so on. So many years later, I went back to the area, and at that point, I knew people. I knew where to start. Many of the community members knew me. So I started together with them an extensive documentation in the area of agriculture and house construction. There are reasons why I chose house construction and agriculture. It will take long to explain that, but I wanted to get stories, narratives, discourse, and conversations in these two things. And by trying to do that, I took research assistants, 5 at a time. And in the period I was there, all 5 of them worked with me full time. And when I returned back to my university in the Netherlands, these people worked half of their time on the project, collecting material and so And I needed to do that because what happens in most such documentation projects is that people would come, start with a few people, researchers, I mean, linguists would come, start working with local people, but when they go back, these other people are taken away for some other job. They cannot stay, continue working when the moment the researcher is back. But I was lucky with the project with ALDP, there was a resource to employ these young people who just finished high school. Some of them have beyond high school and 1-year diploma, but were not employed. So they were very happy to work on the project, and I was very happy with them. And having them really was really very essential for me because they could do a lot of work in recording, really much better than I could do. They were engaged in working in a semantic dictionary. I will explain in a while, I think in the next question when Pius comes, not to take too much time here. They were involved in in transcription and discussion of the grammar, and they were fully engaged. And I think having that opportunity to work with the community was essential. I'm not saying that these 5 were the community. I mean, community is a huge concept, but what they did was they went to different social members of the society. They would go, they would interview. I would, step back and see them do the work. We would have a discussion every day, but they took initiative what to record, what they found is important to document. And so it is, I was there, I was part of the work, but it's mainly guided and actually executed also partly by them. And this is something, compared to the works, the grammatical work I could do earlier or documentation work I did earlier. Here I found community participation very, very important and really possible because the people also saw the way things are going with their language. Younger generation of learning it, a huge bilingualism in Gamo, there being being opportunities for young people to find jobs there, because I told you earlier how important language and ethnicity is for administration in Ethiopia in the current situation. So people who had their languages recognized, languages used in administration and so on, had more possibilities for job mobility and so on. And the Zargula young people, the people, I will show you some of their photos in a while. For example, they just finished the school and they are back to farming because they couldn't move on with work. So that is really a reason. Pius, if you don't mind, if you could show a few of the photos of my consultants I shared with you. The slides, yes. After the map, yeah. Yes, so here, this is one of my, the research assistants I mentioned, Asmerlash Mikael. He finished high school and a 1-year diploma, but he became a farmer. And later when I started working there, he really very essential part of the project. And what I did was when I was there, I would give him the camera. In the beginning, he wouldn't hold it properly, but he learned it amazingly fast. And he recorded things he did, because I mentioned to him that I'm interested in the farming activities, vocabulary of farming, stories, narratives around farming. He started recording when people did something and when he himself did, so video, audio recording. If you show the next slide, for example, here you see the Zargula area is mountainous, and I myself had difficulty recording, holding the camera still and walking with the steep areas up and down, but Asmelash had no problem with that. He is used to the area, the terrain. So he made beautiful recordings as people did their farming activities. He followed them. And I found really incredibly interesting things like how people use, for example, language when farming, the way they call their animals, the way they give commands to animals, and that kind of material, which I wouldn't come across if I did things only myself. And so you see that in this photo on the left side, that was one of the films he made, beautiful recording he did. And another thing was that when I was back to the Netherlands, there were events and or occasions which I could not witness, but they thought was very essential for them. One of them, for example, was in 2018, there was a huge flooding. I told you the Zargulla area was partly mountainous, and it was a huge flooding. Here you see in the photo on the right side, this is somebody's farm, always almost ripe maize or banana, all kinds of plants, and everything was washed away at the night. But Asmelash made a recording of that the next day when the whole, people in the village came around and were watching that, and they were calling for help from the district and regional level in other big cities. So he recorded all that. He interviewed people, and then few days later, authorities come to witness a thing, and he was showing them that, and he recorded all that. So things related to environment, things related to their livelihood, things that interested them, he just could record. And what I said to him was, here is a full recording, audio, video recording material, keep this with you, record whatever you like, and later we would exchange that and transcribe that. So there is a huge interest. They were really committed and they were very helpful. And to my surprise, these people, how fast they can learn. Maybe I will discuss later when we engaged into the real transcription and analysis work as well, the way they learned. The tools I had for documentation, for transcription was incredible. So community participation for me was essential, and it did help me learn a lot. So let me stop here and then maybe we'll come back to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's it. Thank you. When community members take such interest and begin to participate in language documentation themselves, it pushes the work quite far, and people tend to accept, these kinds of things that are produced by themselves. We have quite a good number of questions in the chat. Maybe we should take some of these before we proceed. There is a question from, two questions directed to Hana. One from Felix Omeka. If Hana could expand on the grammar workshop in terms of its conception, goals, and outcomes. The second question to Hana from Priyanka Kabanda. Thanks everyone in the panel for the talk. My question is for Hana. You mentioned conducting monolingual fieldwork when documenting Nungan. I would like to know what are its advantages, challenges against the controlled translation elicitation model. So also, did you learn the language before visiting the field? And does Nungan has its own script since it is taught in primary school? So Hana, if you can address those two briefly.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be very brief. So Felix, thanks for the question. The community grammar workshop was actually a long-standing request of the Nuon community. So I think that this is even a request that was sort of leveled in maybe the last stages of my PhD fieldwork, that people were saying, well, when are you going to share this with us and that sort of thing? And it was delayed a little bit when I was away from the field working. And so my next field trip back to the field, I believe I ran this workshop. Sorry, not the next one, after 2 trips. So it took a little while to get it together. Basically, the idea was it was simply one afternoon. It wasn't very long. And ideally, I think it would be a bit longer and multi-day. Simply using, it's very related to what Ekua mentioned, that simply showing people that the language has rules. You don't just open your mouth and talk, because of course you learn other languages' rules in school. And sometimes it's easy to think that your language has no systematicity. And of course, it has a beautiful systematicity, of course, and very, very impressive systematicity, quite a bit past the Pidgin cum Creole talk pisin that people would be shifting to. So basically, the idea was to use the Socratic method and to guide people through a few pieces of their language's grammar so that they would discover for themselves the systematicity. So we would go, first we went to phonology and we simply looked at the sounds in the language. We said, okay, let's take this sound that we write with this letter, and let's think about, can it start a word? Can it end a word? Can it occur in the middle of the word? And we just talked about systematicity there in terms of where different sounds can occur and where they're just prohibited. And people say, oh, wow, I never thought that sound couldn't occur at the end of the word. There are some internal rules and logic to this language, our language. Then the second thing we looked at, the major thing that we looked at was moving words around in a phrase or a sentence. So again, looking at systematicity and looking at the different roles that different words played, and that there were some things that could be done, but you definitely don't just open your mouth and sort of spill words haphazardly. Everyone who attended got a spiral bound grammar book that was in Nuon with some terms in English. And then there were some extra ones for people. People were free to attend. So people who ended up attending, there were probably about 40-ish people there. Then there were some people kind of sitting outside who were a little embarrassed to actually be inside. It was, building without walls. So everyone who attended got a grammar book. There were some extras that were circulated afterward. And the outcome, I think, was simply enhanced interest, and I think sort of a standing request for more of the same. People were interested. They got a sort of a peek at the systematicity of their language, and I think they just want more, especially teachers in the school. So we hope to deliver more of that in the coming years, and it is a real collaborative process. So more support for teaching, I think, is really essential. Thank you for that question, Felix. The second question about the monolingual approach, I think that there's, and thanks Priyanka for that question. I think the really relevant thing to our discussion now is, to me, there is an inherent, this notion of respect and sort of being part of the community instead of being separate to it, and this idea of humbling yourself. And I taught field methods monolingually when I was at UCLA for a year. And I noticed that the PhD students, it was a required course for PhD students at a certain stage of their PhD there. I noticed that in the beginning of working monolingually with somebody, it's really embarrassing. It's embarrassing to make mistakes. It's embarrassing to try to speak this language and mess up. And it's really humbling. And I think that's a really important thing, especially if you have sort of a post-colonial situation or a situation where you have a marginalized language, that the researcher or the outsider is willing to make mistakes and be really, really humble and not be the outside expert, because they're not even speaking as well as a 3-year-old child would in the beginning. So I think maybe that's the relevant point. I'll just stop there with the monolingual methods.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. The next question from Mark van der Veld is on orthography creation. And Mark is, thanks for that question, Mark. Mark is wondering whether any of us had any experience with orthography creation, especially regarding consensus with a community. And there is a follow-up from Elias Williams on that, who is also interested in this orthography-related question, because he's about to meet the orthography committee to agree on the script, especially with the intention of choosing simple scripts. So did anyone have an experience with orthography creation, and how did they come to a consensus with the community? Is there anyone who had such an experience?
Yeah.
Azzy, did you?
Maybe briefly I would comment. When I worked in the Oida language documentation, the people, the Oida language is not used in mother tongue education. It was not written in the area. Gofa language, that is majority language, is taught as a medium of it was a medium of instruction. It was taught as subject in school, and the Oida and Gofa have these competitions. So when I started doing the documentation, the first thing they wanted was how to write, you know, the way I write, say, so linguistic transcription I was doing. I said, so you can write ours this way. We really want this writing system, and we want that to be used in schools. You know, we want also to use our language in the way Gofa is used. So they immediately set up a committee of local people and started teachers who were local teachers. They started to prepare an orthographic system, and those people consulted me all the time. And there was an interest. There is a consonant, for example, a velar, voiced velar, ha, and that velar consonant is not available in Gofa, and the Oida speakers really wanted very much to get that thing written in their language. So it was like a mark, you know, this is an identity mark. This how different this from Gofa. So they said, how can we write that? And that is a consonant we write with bent H on top. And so there was a whole discussion about that and making agreement on that. And they did really, I gave some advice and how to, you know, capture contrasting forms and so on. But these people were teachers from local community, and they could come up with a result. And we had a discussion regularly on that. And they started immediately to make applications to the regional administration in Arbaminch, in a different, in the capital city of the region. And they started translating books to use at school, and started pilot classes within a year or something. So they were really interested, and I did advise and so on, but I didn't create the orthography itself. They use the Latin script. So I will come back maybe later to that. The script is also an issue in Ethiopia. We have the Fidel script, the Latin-based local script, and so on. So there they use the Latin-based script of Gofa and added certain symbols to it, in which Gofa consonants were not included. So that's the experience I have with creating that. Another thing was I did also help in a script for on the Malay language. They really wanted to have a script in using the Fidel, the Abugida system, the Ethiopic script. And the problem with that script was it didn't show length. They wanted that script because many elderly people were made literate in using infidel script. So now if they start the school, they didn't want to lose these elderly people who could read and write already. So they said the new script should be written in Fidel, but it has this problem. So there again, I also helped, like how you can indicate in the Fidel, the Abugida system, also how you can indicate lengths, consonant and vowel lengths, and so on. They made that discussion among themselves and started translating various texts from different languages, from the Bible and so on. I don't know if Mark's question is answered this. Thank you, Mark, for being here and for the question.
Yeah. Thank you. So it should always be a consensus between the researcher and the community, and not like the researcher imposing anything. And orthography, if it's for use by the people, they should be comfortable with the symbols that are adopted and the different conventions that are adopted. And eventually, as they try the orthography, there may be modifications. So thank you so much for that response. And there is still one more issue in the chart. some people in the audience would like us to clarify our use of elicitation when we talk about elicitation as a method of collecting data for our work. What does this mean? If someone can throw light on that. Stephen, or maybe it,
yes.
It goes, yeah.
Yeah, so elicitation, I suppose, is, I mean, there are different definitions, but one would be to ask someone how you say something. So it would be done often by asking them a question in another language. How do you say, today I will go to the field, yesterday I went to the field, tomorrow I will go to the field, just now I am going to the field, and by this you might be able to work out whether the language has a system of marking time. That's perhaps an example. I don't know if I may just very briefly say something about orthography and script development, since this has been something I have been involved in for a long time. And I think the thing that I have learned over the last 25 years is that it's my job as a linguist to support the community members that I am in contact with to do whatever it is they want to do in terms of writing. And this sometimes means supporting different people who are doing things that are in fact not in accord with each other. So within the Tangsa languages, there is, on the Myanmar side, there is a unified script, which is a good one. But I'm also supporting people on the Myanmar side who want to use their own script. Similarly, those are, as well as supporting those who want to use the unified script. On the India side, there are multiple Roman-based orthographies, and again, working with people who are using those, as well as working with people who are using the newly invented, well, not, I won't say newly because it's now 31 years old, Tangsa script. Many years ago, I was involved in working with one language in India, and I won't say which, and you'll hear why in a moment. And these people had been told by a related language spoken in a different country that they should write in a particular way. And they couldn't understand it. And so they decided to come up with their own script, their own orthography, which they were happy with. But the people from that other country were not happy with it at all. And so my view on this is that I think there will be, for many of these different languages, multiple ways of doing things, and that communities will develop something over a long time that suits them. And for now, as a linguist, I think my job is to support whatever people want to do. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before, as we move towards the end of our discussion, we just want to check with our panelists if you have any views specifically on how you think community involvement has or even can lead to maybe support for that language, or how you think community involvement advances can or has been able to advance literacy in the language, or how it has been able to promote the language, maybe revitalization, and so on. If you have any thoughts on this, maybe beginning from Azad, if you have.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think community involvement has been very helpful, as I said, in terms of the type and variety and quality of data collection, as we mentioned earlier, and also in terms of better translation, and also the kind of, okay, my grammar on Sargula is still in progress. Still, I have to come up with specific examples, like where engagement of specifically working with broader community members, what it yielded and so on. I need to come up with that kind of examples, but generally, I think working with a large number of people brings in a lot of nuance into the kind of data, the kind of interpretation. As I said, I had a large number of young people who each in group of 2 or 3 went out and talked to further people in my presence or absence and collected data, consulted people and so on. And then when they came back together, what we did was transcription at different layers. Initially, when I started working with Zargula, I had only one laptop on which I tried to do the transcription, but I had to think of a way to engage these people also in the transcription. For me, it was essential to show them what I do and that they could also do it themselves. So what I did was the easiest for them was, I had to look at my consultants and distinguish different form of literacy or depending on when they went to school. There were young people in the group, for example, who went to school, who did their primary school prior to 2000, and these people were good at writing using the Fidel script, the Abugida system in which Amharic, Tigrinya, and so on are written. They also did English as a subject, so they could write using the English alphabet, the recordings, they would hear them and write them on paper. I had small booklets like this. I don't know if you could see this. So they would hear the audio and then transcribe, had to write. So in that writing, a choice had to be made. So the Fidel script, because it differed very much from the transcription method I followed, they were less interested. They wanted to use a Latin-based script to transcribe, of course. And that is done in the nearest language in Gamo. So I said, okay, go ahead. You hear the recordings and transcribe them in Gamo. Some of my assistants were good in transcribing in Gamo, but others who did their education earlier in Fidel didn't know this system. So they had to learn, practice it. They knew there was material in Gamo, in the North Someto Gamo, which they have seen in print and so on, but they did not read and write in this language, some of them. So it was for them a kind of going to kind of literacy in this writing system. So they started reading, and the ones who went to school later and educated in the Gamo script started training the others. So they did initial transcription for me using the Gamo script. So yes, that collaboration with them had brought them into kind of a position that they have to be literate in this writing system, which they could maybe later apply to their own language. That is one thing. And the other thing is that the biggest interest, so they were interested in that. They really liked to be able to read and write. And I gave them not only this, in our workflow, it's not only transcription, but they had to write some things. For example, we had an idea of a semantic dictionary. So instead of just, next to taking, extracting words from recorded material via ELAN and so on, I also wanted to have a kind of dictionary of farming and house construction concepts. And to be able to do that, I didn't want them to just go and, ask what is this word and so on, but, to look at farming and house construction holistically, and then come up themselves with a story. So what they did was practically, what is a house? And then a house is something with a wall, a roof, and then they say in a wall you make, in our area, You have two types of houses, a wall with wood, and then they would then go describe about what kind of wood is the best for a wall. So there are different types of woods, and where are those woods found, the best ones, and who cuts them, who shapes the woods into a wall. So all that one by one they describe. And then the ceiling is made grass thatch, and the name of the grass thatch, and who plants that, where it is planted, how it is cut and prepared. They went writing that on those notebooks using the Gamo script, which is Latin, which I could read with some instruction from them, like because they use diagraphs for some symbols. So I had to also teach myself a reading writing system in Gamo, and they did the same. So working in that dictionary made them write, and transcribing the audio recordings is also another form of reading and writing, which they really, really enjoyed. And I would like you maybe now to show the two things as I gave you as illustration. So the thing is, these people, as I said, they are high school graduates. Some of them did additionally 1 year diploma training, but they were quick to learn how to work using Pratt. I used, there is the Corpa for us, maybe Amina can later relate to it more. I was engaged in a kind of methodology, how to, for example, from a recording, create text, which was explicitly written. And I really shared that with them. We talked about it, and they could quickly see how that works. So they helped me a lot in chunking recordings, transcribing. So when I went, the first time I had only one laptop. In my second and third field visit in the documentation project, I took 2 extra laptops. So part of my consultants could work on the computer. So some of them, they initially didn't even touch a computer, but they could quickly start doing transcription, segmentation on the laptop. So as you could see here, my consultant Urdinesh, I first taught her, and she taught this guy Amara how to transcribe, segment, and so on. And then the others did it on paper form, as you could see here, different people. So sometimes they each work individually. There were times also when they would just sit together, put their heads together, and discuss about a grammatical notion. If you play this next slide, for example, you would see here, wait a minute, okay. Can you hear it? Yeah, you can stop it. I think I can. You know, the point is here, they are, so the initial transcriptions written in Gamo on a paper, you know, leaving 2-3 lines open, and then they would add translation, word by word translation later, and discuss various grammatical things. In this context, they were discussing about a negative construction, which is a bit unusual. You know, it's something like added, a negation added to a nominal form, and somebody gets confused with that, and the others try to explain, you know, without it, so it is added to the word shrub, without it becoming shrub or something like that. And they engage in a long discussion about how that works. And those discussions in the grammatical negative construction also enlightened me a lot. So working together with a large number of people who do the work hands-on themselves had also educated me a lot, or trained me, or brought me more understanding into the language. So this is part of the community engagement I was mentioning earlier. So better translation, better recording, better work one can do. So that's what I noticed in my.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Azib. I think we are towards the end. If other panelists, if you have some last things to say, you can just feel free to take the floor while I look at the questions in the chat. So we have maybe Antoine Corral is asking how a community can agree on one when there are different systems defended by different speakers who might judge that one is better than the other. Is it a problem that different orthographic systems coexist? Well, this is it's quite a tricky issue. We don't want to have different writing systems for the same language. But we want to move towards a consensus at some point where the language has a single and accepted system. So that, yeah, okay. Let's see. There is a question. I have to find that. So there is a question from Felix to Yankee about the ethics board. I'm looking for that question. But I don't find that question on the chart.
So it is written in the book, how far the ethics board constrain her work.
Okay, if you can see it, how far the ethics board constrained her work. Okay, Yankee. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Felix, for asking. The ethic board doesn't constrain my work, but in terms of the hours and time that I spend wasting trying to please them, I think that was a big chunk of resources being wasted. I could have used that resources for a lot of good things that I could have done, and I see that as just a waste of time. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yankee. Thank you to everyone. Big thank you to the panelists. A big thank you to all those in the audience. Thank you for your time. Thank you also for the questions. And we really just thank you all for making it, spending this time to share your experiences, to share your views. And we really appreciate. Thanks again. And we keep the discussion going. And we would like to end at this point. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Azeb, Ekwa, Hana, Yankee, Stephen, Li Jianfu, and Pius for this wonderful roundtable. I think it was super exciting and lively, and you answered very graciously and nicely the audience's questions. So thank you very much. I would like also to say that the topic echoes a number of exchanges that we also had with other guests in our invitations series. So for the audience, you can go back to videos also with Scott Delancey, Bruna Franchetto, Nick Evans, Friederike Lübke, also broached those questions. So there's quite a lot of food for thought beyond this roundtable, which already gave so many thoughts and ideas about this question of community involvement in grammar writing. Also, I'd like to mention that on the same theme, ILARA is offering a free training course on auto-documentation of their own languages and cultures to speakers and heritage speakers of Amazigh languages, due to start in November. And there are more details on our website about this for those of you who are speakers or heritage speakers of those languages. I'd like to warmly thank our audience, all the people who watched us and interacted through the live chat. We will announce our next roundtables and talks on our social media, so please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and subscribe to our channel. Again, a very warm thank you to all the panelists and Pius for this wonderful roundtable, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.